Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this video is titled, Your First Year as a New Airline Captain is the Most Fun. Now, I spent 25 years as an airline captain, which was really more than my fair share. It should really be, at the time I got hired, there were three people, so it should have been a third of my career, which would have been a little bit over 10 years. Or if you look at doing away with the second officer's position, then at most half 15. But I was very fortunate to have a very long career as captain. Now, at the time, things had stagnated for a long time at our airline. I was hired in 1979, furloughed, recalled in 85, and I made captain in 1991 at the age of 40, just before my 41st birthday. Now, at the time, most of the captains were in their 50s, and a lot of my contemporaries at the time, some of them spent less than 10 years as captains. Others had more time, but many of them spent less than 10 years. But anybody who was a captain at the time was generally in their 50s. So, and I looked fairly young, even in my 40s, I looked fairly young. So that produced a few interesting dynamics. Now, don't be blown away by the advanced technology of the 737-200. I know you're pretty impressed here. It was a two-man setup. My first co-pilot was a young woman, and we still have very fond memories of that first month, because that first month being a captain is a lot of fun. And I had a few young co-pilots, and we still have fond memories of that. One of my young co-pilots now is a very senior 787 captain and line check airman, and we still enjoy those early days. Now, a lot of the co-pilots came from retired military or other airlines at the time. We were hiring a lot of Eastern and various other airlines like that. So, and unfortunately, I don't have a good picture of me as a captain back in those early days. This is a flight test picture, um, and I look, I look reasonably young. Now, given most captains were in their 50s, I looked very young. Most of my co-pilots looked considerably older. They weren't quite as bad as this gentleman. This is a stock photo I think a lot of you probably are familiar with. Rest easy tonight. Your Air Force is awake and on alert. But anyway, um, I was dealing with a lot of co-pilots, and for me, actually, it was very fortunate because I had co-pilots who had more time, more airline pilot time than I did, and more time as captain than I had time as an airline pilot. So I had a wealth of experience, and they were great people. When I was in the Air Force, Lieutenant Colonel, Colonel, and above was, they were virtual gods, and my most interesting time was when I had a two-star general in the reserves as my co-pilot. I would have never thought about telling a two-star general to go out and get the walk around, but yeah, that was kind of interesting. But anyway, these were great people to fly with, and I could rely on their experience, but it caused a few interesting situations. Now, I went into Tucson. I went into operations, and there was this is a stock photo again. There was a ramper guy there, kind of resting at his desk, and I go in there and say, "Hey, how you doing? Like to get the flight papers?" And he sort of looks at me. He reaches back. He gets his cup of coffee, starts to take a sip, and then my co-pilot comes in. Well, I had blonde hair at the time, not like now. I had blonde hair back then, and my co-pilot comes in. He is older. He's in his 50s. He has white hair. He has little granny glasses. The individual puts down his coffee, jumps up, grabs the paper, hands him to my co-pilot, and he goes, "Here, Captain. Here are the papers." My co-pilot turns, looks at me, hands the papers to me, and he goes, "Here, Captain. Here are the papers." You should have seen the guy's jaw drop. And that wasn't unusual. A lot of people just didn't think I was the captain, especially when I was flying with an older individual. I guess the four stripes didn't stand out very much, or the hat or whatever. They just assumed that since I looked younger, I was the co-pilot. Well, here we are. We're back on the 737, and we're doing kind of a quick turn here. And of course, I meet the A flight attendant, the head flight attendant of the three, the purser, and we introduce each other, and we're doing a flight up to Rapid City, South Dakota, and we're laying over. Now, one of the nice things about the layover at Rapid City is they had this blue car you could rent, right? We stayed at the Hilton downtown, and 2 blocks away, there was a little place. They rented this blue car for 20 bucks a day. So the crews would get in it and we'd drive up to Mount Rushmore. And we're up at Mount Rushmore there, and I've got the A flight attendant standing next to me, and my co pilot's off in a little bit of distance. And one of the flight attendants from the back comes up and she asks the purser, she says, "What was the captain's name? I forgot." So I said, "Captain's name's Ron." And the purser takes and whacks me in the arm, and she turns to her other compatriot and points at me, and she says, "He's the captain." Well, that was kind of funny. I on the way back to Chicago, I related the story to my co-pilot. He was kind of a heavy-set guy. He was balding. He had gray hair, and we started talking and joking about the fact that, he looked older, so I assumed he was the captain. Funny thing, found out he was actually a good number of years younger than me. Well, that was slightly embarrassing. All right, this is a stock photo. I don't have a picture of the very beautiful young co-pilot I had for this month of flying, but we had a very interesting month. We were down at Nashville. We're getting ready to go back out to the airport. I get the 3 flight attendants come on board. I get on board the van. She comes down, sets next to me. The driver looks back and says, "Well, I guess we're waiting for the co-pilot, huh?" And I go, "Yeah, he should be along any minute now." And she leans over and hits me in the arm. And we kind of laugh. And I said, "Oh, tell the driver," I said, "Yeah, we're ready to go. We got everybody." And he goes, "What?" I said, "We got everybody. We can go." So we go on out. A little bit later, we're doing a turn out of Daytona, and we're getting ready to take off. And there's delay back at Chicago, and I'm doing a little PA announcement, and she just starts laughing, um, her posterior off over in the corner there. And I go, let up on the PA, and I go, "What?" And she goes, "Don't you know what you just said?" And I go, "I tell him about the delay." And she goes, "No, you said we should be getting off in a few minutes." And then she starts laughing again. I go, "Okay, I didn't mean any innuendos there." Um, Picked up the PA and started giving just a little more update on our flight. So, last story of the year. Okay. We're going out to Honolulu. And at the time, the DC 10 route from Chicago to Honolulu, that was the senior trip. I mean, we hadn't bought the Pacific Division from Pan Am yet. We hadn't expanded into Europe and expanded all over the place like we are now. But so that was a senior trip. And I figured at the end of my career, I would be flying captain on the DC 10 to, Honolulu, not thinking that maybe we would be getting newer airplanes like 777s and things in that time. But anyway, that was a senior trip. The flight was full. My wife's in the back, and I'm up front in the cockpit, sitting in the jump seat. And the captain that flying the trip was a captain I had flown with before on the DC-10, so he knew me. And the first officer was number 2 on the airplane. He was actually much more senior than I was, seniority-wise with the airline, but he needed his seniority, so he stayed very senior on the DC-10, and of course he got the plum trips. Well, the A flight attendant comes up, and I've got my little carry-on bag there, and I've got my nice little plasticized name tag, and it says Ron Rogers, Captain. And she looks down at that because now the flight attendants on Hawaii, they were like their own little airline. They just flew Hawaii. And so they just flew with the most senior captains who only had a few years to go. And at the time you retired at 60. So these were the older captains, and I looked, quite a bit younger. So she comes up there and she looks at that name tag and she looks at me and says, You're a captain?" Okay, well, I had to play with this. And I go, "Well, yeah." And she says, "What on?" And I go, "This, DC-10." And of course, the 2 guys up front start laughing. And then we say, "Yeah, now things are expanding. There actually are new young captains." Of course, nowadays, I mean, new hires are going to the right seat of wide bodies, and they've actually had to consider the possibility of very inexperienced people going, new hires, very inexperienced new hire people going to the captain's seat just because things are expanding so much. extremely different airline back then. I started out as a 737, the coveted 737 flight engineer position. I will talk about that in another video. So anyway, thanks for watching.